All right, hello everyone. Welcome to this month's Portals community call. I'm Jason Gumpert from msdynamicsworld.com. As always, I'm really pleased to be able to be a part of these events, and we are about ready to go. I just have a couple of notes as we begin. So first, we do welcome your questions during these events. Look for the questions block within the webcast interface. Enter them at any time. Our presenters will be keeping an eye on that as the session goes along. And we do have a guest presenter today, Jacob Chapman from Engineered Code. Really great to have him with us, along with our regular host, Nicholas Hayduk. And just one other note before I hand it off to Nick, we are recording today's event. We will be also putting that on demand. So without any further delay, Nick, I'm going to hand things over to you.
All right, thank you, Jason. We do have a guest presenter today, our first engineered code employee who put his hand up and volunteered to take a session with us. So excited about that. As Jason mentioned, that would be Jacob Chapman, and he'll be covering some advanced JavaScript techniques for Power Pages. But first, we will do kind of our typical. I'll do an intro for myself, and we'll get through our news and that sort of thing first. So, for those of you who are new to the call, my name is Nicholas Hayduk. I'm the president and software engineer at Engineered Code Consulting Inc., based here in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada. I'm a Microsoft MVP that has been focused on Power Pages essentially my entire career, which began at ADX Studio. If we're not already connected on LinkedIn, please feel free to do that. You can also follow us on our Twitter. We do have a blog. We also have our YouTube channel where we do release a Power Pages tip every week. And we also have a podcast, Refresh the Cache podcast, devoted to Power Pages that is available via crm.audio. So feel free to connect or follow or all those things, all those different social media verbs with me. Happy to connect and chat Power Pages with people for sure. As always, just want to say thank you to Jason and the entire team at MS Dynamics World for their support of this endeavor. That's, I think, into our 4th year now. Just wrapping up, I guess we'll have a few more sessions here before the end of the year. Really great to have his support for these calls. We get lots of good feedback from the community about these calls, so in no small part thanks to the efforts from Jason and his team. So we will talk about our news. We'll talk about today's topic. We'll talk about our next community call. It's only been a few weeks since we last chatted. I think just some scheduling things push this one up a little bit further. And as you'll see, our next call is actually going to be kind of later in October due to some other scheduling things. So we'll talk about that here in a bit. As Jason mentioned, feel free to drop any questions that you might have in the questions block. We will keep an eye on those during Jacob's presentation, as well as if you have anything else that you want to ask, please drop it in there and we will address that at the end of the call as well. Let's talk about a bit of news. Even though it's only, like I said, been a few weeks since we last chatted, there were a couple of announcements in the Power Pages blog. So one of these was Copilot integration into Visual Studio Code Desktop. So if you are using the Power Platform CLI, so the PAC tool, and you're using that to download your Power Pages code, and using the desktop version of Visual Studio Code to edit your Power Pages code, there is some Copilot assistance that you can get in there now. So this will allow you to do things like ask Copilot to write some JavaScript validation for you, or ask it to do some CSS for you. Here, I'm going to bring it up here. So this was the announcement here from Microsoft. So you can see that you can have it help you do form and list customization, web page customization, web template customization, Liquid, Fetch XML, Web API, content snippets. So there's lots of things that you can do. Again, this is in the desktop version of VS Code. And primarily the way that you'd be interacting with that is you'd be downloading your Power Pages code using the PAC CLI, editing it locally, and then uploading it back again using the upload. I do see a question here from Lucas about anyone tried using VS Code CLI with enhanced pages. So I have not tried it with the enhanced data model. It wouldn't surprise me if that didn't work. The enhanced data model is still in preview, so it's possible that the Pack CLI has not been updated to respect that. I don't know for sure either way. I haven't seen any announcement that the Pack CLI does support it, so it doesn't surprise me that that's maybe not working. One of the things with something being in preview, yeah, the enhanced data model that which we talked about last month is a great step forward, but yeah, you'll run into little things like that as it continues to be in preview. Second item, which is I think really cool and exciting, which is the Power Pages integration with DocuSign.
Hey,
Now,
Nick, I think your screen is paused.
Oh, it is paused. There you go. Is that better?
Yes.
It's probably been paused the whole time, hasn't it? Oh well, we'll just keep moving forward. All right, so this one is the Power Pages integration with DocuSign. So this to me has kind of two exciting parts. One is, yeah, it's great. We have integration with DocuSign. Having digital or electronic signatures happen via Power Pages has been a use case that's been around a long time. I do know lots of different organizations who have implemented their own kind of custom thing to do that. And so having just kind of one standard way that most people will probably use going forward is great. But what I also very much like is that when you go to set this up, you'll see that there's a new area. Let's just see if I can zoom in here. There's a new area in the setup workspace called integrations. And so essentially you can see that Microsoft would not have built all of that kind of foundational work just for one DocuSign integration. So it shows you that as we go, that we're expecting to see more and more integrations and a nice easy way of setting things up. So DocuSign is hopefully just the first of many, but I do like that what they've done here is they've built this right into the UI. They built it into the design studio. And so I do expect to see more things added here. I believe that this integration works using a Cloudflow behind the scenes, so a Power Automate Cloudflow, which I believe is customizable. And yeah, they have a bunch of use cases here for why signing documents would be helpful. I think most people could probably come up with many of those scenarios off the top of their head. So I think this is a cool integration. It's showcasing how we're going to see integrations with Power Pages in the future and how we can use Power Pages with Power Automate flows. The ability, just to kind of spoiler alert, one of the things that Jacob's going to be talking about today is the ability to run a Power Automate flow using the web API. So I think some of that might be leveraged in here as well. So really nice to see Microsoft using some of those capabilities and building out this integration with DocuSign. All right, I'm going to flip back here to my presentation. Okay, another news, I guess, but it's just kind of, I guess, a hashtag shameless plug. I will be at the Community Summit in Charlotte, North Carolina, coming up here in a few weeks, third week of October. I have 4 sessions. So if any of you folks are going to be attending the Community Summit in Charlotte, if you're interested in attending those sessions, please do. If not, please at least come and say hi. I'll be there pretty much the entire week. So look forward to seeing some of you folks in person as we get back to these nice big events where we get to have some fun and learn lots and all that sort of stuff. So hope to see some of you in Charlotte. All right, so I'm going to say, okay, well, we've got today's topic. Now, before we do that, just to help with some of the transition stuff, I will say that the next call we have is October 26th, same time. The reason that is kind of a little bit later in the month is because of that community summit, which I will be attending. So we've got a few weeks, so expect there to be quite a bit of news because that's about 6 weeks from now. So a little bit of a break before our next one, but hope to see all of you there. So I'm going to go back to this. So today's topic, as I mentioned, advanced JavaScript techniques for Power Pages. We've got Jacob Chapman from Engineered Code here today. Jacob is a developer on the team, so knows how to write all that fancy pro code. So today he's going to be showing us a few different techniques that he's been using to help some of our clients with kind of more advanced requirements with Power Pages. So Jacob, welcome to the call, and go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So hi everyone. My name is Jacob Chapman. Just as Nick mentioned, I am one of the software developers here at Engineered Code, and I just want to thank you all for coming today to the Portals Community Call and listening on my presentation. I'm just going to share my screen.
We see your screen now.
Okay.
There's awesome. Back.
So yeah, today I'm going to be covering some advanced JavaScript techniques that can be used on Power Pages. And I just want to thank Jason and Nick again for letting me present today. So the topics that I'll be highlighting today are fake web API calls, how to implement tabs on portal forms, and as Nick mentioned, calling Cloud flows via the web API on Power Pages. So let's jump right into things. So the first topic is called fake web API call. So what does that actually mean though? Well, this technique was actually used before Portals had its own API to call, and it was a standard practice that was used a lot back in the day. So I'm bringing this up because it is an alternative to using the Portals web API and can become quite useful. So what is it? Essentially, it's just an AJAX request to a web page that does a GET operation on a fetch XML query that you have inside an associated web template. And as a result, it simply just returns a JSON object. So I will demonstrate and show the implementation method that I used for testing. So I'm just going to pull my windows over here. All right, so for this demo, I created a simple contact details form that has a button at the top of the page called Fake Web API Call. And so when I press this button, it will execute an AJAX call that looks like it would be towards the web API, but it just calls a web page that gets me a JSON object. Now, let me show you the code behind this first, and that'll demonstrate the behavior. So on the contact, so I have a simple web page for the contact details here, and so I put some JavaScript that adds the button. This is where the code is that simply just creates that button at the top of the page, and it has an on-click attribute that calls my fake web API function. And so if I scroll down here, the function is pretty simple, as it only does an AJAX call to my portal, with the partial URL being to the web page that has my fetch XML on it. So let's take a look at this all-contacts web page. Let's see what's going on there. So here's my web page for the all-contacts, and essentially there's nothing really on the web page record. There's no JavaScript. All that we have here is a page template that has the web template associated to that. So upon opening up the page template, notice how I don't have the use header and footer option checked off. It's important that we don't have this checked off because we only want to return the JSON object that's defined inside the web template. Now, when I demo this particular topic, I'll show what happens when this is checked off to present, why we shouldn't have this box checked. So on the web template is where all the magic really happens. So from lines 1 through 10, I use Liquid to create my fetch XML query, which in this example is pretty basic, as all it does is return me a list of all contacts. From lines 11 onward is where we construct our return JSON object. We directly compile and build the JSON in this web template. So what we end up with is a JSON object that contains our total record count. And we can have some other parameters here, such as the paging cookie. If there are more than 5,000 records, we can construct that as well. And lastly, we have the results array, which actually holds all of our data. And this is where we can control what comes back, and we can also format the data here as well. Also, you'll notice on line 16, I use a liquid for loop to iterate over the list of records brought back from the fetch. It's important to note that if you're working with the liquid fetch XML, you always need to use a for loop, even if you're expected to just get back one record. And that's because liquid fetch always returns an array. So finally, to ensure we're getting proper JSON back, we can scroll down to the bottom of the page here. And you'll notice we see this MIME type field. And if we just type in application/JSON, this ensures that we get actual JSON back as a result. And so I'm going to go back to the contact details page on my portal here. And so I'm going to demonstrate the behavior now for this fake web API call, and what's the behavior of it. So I'm going to have the console open here in my dev tools because my function simply just console logs the resulted JSON object. So once I press it here, as we can see here, I click the button and we see that it did successfully retrieve that JSON object, and we can see we have our results here, which is a list of all the contacts. And this is returned as a proper JSON object. Now, remember when I said to not check off the header and footer inside that page template? Well, let's see what happens now when that is checked off. So I'm going to head back here to my page template. I'm just simply going to check this box, save it, and I'm just going to quickly clear the cache for my portal here. So now if I refresh the page, all right, so now we cleared the cache and refreshed the page, I'm just simply gonna press this button again, and we're gonna see a different behavior. So now that I press the button again, we're getting the entire header and footer rather than just that JSON object, which we don't want the header and footer in our result. We just want that JSON. So that's why that's why we don't check off that box. So now I'm just going to quickly go back to the PowerPoint. So what are some pros and cons to this strategy? Well, the big pro is that we don't have to enable the web API for this approach. It solely relies on table permissions. Enabling the web API opens up a security hole if you aren't careful how you use it. Both the web API and this approach rely on table permissions. However, in this case, we don't have to worry that there isn't an entire setting enabled for this one particular instance where I'm doing that call to Dataverse. And another pro is that we can expand this into a much more complex query. We can have multiple fetch XML queries inside that same web template and craft a much larger JSON object to return. And as I said earlier, we can format any data as it comes back to us. And obviously, the big con to doing all of this is that it is a lot of work to set up, as opposing to using the web API and toggling some settings and much fewer lines of code to execute. And so that concludes topic number 1. So the next topic is portal form tabs. So the second topic is portal form tabs, and I'm going to be showing how to implement this on the portal form, and you probably already saw a glimpse of this already and how it can look similar to what is inside the CRM or on the Power Apps editor itself. Instead of showing an entire form on the form or entire form on the portal or showing just a specific tab. So for the demo, let me show you what form we're going to be working with here. Yeah, that's in the CRM. So the form for this demo, I chose to use a simple contact form, which just has 2 tabs, the summary and details tab. We want this implemented on the portal, and this is what I will show how to achieve. So let's take a look at the contact details web page again, and I'll show you the code to get this implemented. So on the web page for the contact details, I simply have a function called form tabs, which I call when the page is loaded. And so this is where the code lies. And I'm basically going to run through all of this and explain what's going on here. So inside the form tabs function, the first thing I do is instantiate a tabs array, which will hold each tab in its entirety. Lines 42 through 49, I loop through each tab title to retrieve the total amount of tabs on the page, in which I initialize by pushing them onto that tabs array. And I also instantiate the tab header to null as well, just so I'm capturing everything that's a part of that tab. If I scroll down here, lines 52 through 55, I actually set each tab object by looping through the list of tabs, which I generated previously, and then I set the element and header accordingly. The actual tab element is the DOM element with the data-name attribute set to the tab name from Power Apps. And the header is always going to be the tab.element.previous object. And then if I scroll down a bit here, lines 58 through 61, I loop through that tabs list again, except the first element, which is denoted by this slice 1, which essentially creates a copy of that tabs array without the first element. So that in this loop, I ensure that I hide every tab except the first one by default on page load. And then if I keep scrolling here, line 64 through 67, I define a div which just contains the actual tab buttons, which get nested above the form in the web page. And this can be tailored to however your design needs are. But for this demonstration, I just put it at the top of the page. And then finally, lines 69 through 81, I set up the logic that gets placed inside each button, which at a high level just shows the currently selected tab and hides the rest of the tabs. So I'll demonstrate this now on the portal side of things. So if I go back to the contact details page, I can click on each of these buttons and it's going to show me each tab as it would inside the CRM. So now to verify our code, works with more than 2 tabs, I'll go back into Power Apps and add more tabs with some dummy fields to test that I can add as many as I want, and the code will respect these changes. So if I go into the contact form here, I'm just simply going to add some extra tabs here. So if I go into components, I'm just going to click on one column tab. I'll just add a couple here, and then I'll rename it for readability. I'll just copy and paste for time's sake here. So I'm just going to save and publish this. And so what I would expect in the portal is that all 5 of these tabs show up and they're dynamically allocated and deallocated accordingly if I remove tabs, add tabs. So now that's saved and published, I'm just going to clear the cache quickly again. Okay, so now I'm just going to go back to a contact record. That not save and publish. Wondering if I didn't save and publish this. Oh, I'm wondering if there's no, I didn't add any fields. That's my mistake. So I'm just going to add some simple fields here. So in the meantime, I'm just going to see if there's any questions here. So nothing so far. All right, I just got to resave and publish that just because I did add some fields here. All right, so now I'm just going to clear the cache again. So I should see these tabs appearing. Okay, so the tabs don't appear because there was no fields on them. But anyways, we can see that the additional tabs that I add to my form are now present on the page and are working as expected. You can see the CSS styling is a little bit off. This can be cleaned up for a better user experience and tailored to however you like. And so, yeah, that is form tabs. I'll just put this over here. So the reason this is such a useful thing in portals is because currently there is no way to actually have tabs out of the box. You can only have the entire form be shown or just have a single tab. So if your form is complex with, let's say you have 6 tabs and multiple fields, there will be a ton of scrolling for users and it can just become cluttered overall. And another thing to mention is that this is just some manipulation with some fancy JavaScript. In essence, this is still the entire form on the page. So if this is a form that allows users to edit or create a record, this will update all of the fields currently present on that page. And lastly, coming back to the topic of this being the entire form behind the scenes, something to keep note of is that at any point a user disables JavaScript in their browser, this entire form will become visible to them and they can see everything that's under the covers. So if you have fields that are sensitive or need to be hidden, make sure they are hidden on the form in Power Apps, since hidden fields on the form don't get rendered on the portal. And so that concludes topic number 2.
So we just have one quick question here from Lucas. Yep. He's asking if we can provide the code somewhere. So yeah, I think we can definitely do that. I haven't done that in the past, so I'm not sure where we'll put it, but we'll figure out some way. So if you just follow us on social media or whatever, we will figure out a way to share that code with the community.
All right, yeah, thanks, Nick, for answering that question. So the last topic I'm going to be talking about is how to call a Cloudflow using JavaScript through the use of the portal's web API. And so this is a fairly newer topic. Within the last few months, this has been available. So to start this topic off, we need to have a Power Automate Cloudflow created with the trigger of Power Pages. So let me demonstrate this step of creating that Cloudflow. So I'm just going to collapse this topic here. And I'm just going to go here. All right, so to start this topic off, yeah, we need to create a Cloudflow with a trigger of Power Pages. And so I'm just going to demonstrate this. So if we click on New, and then we want to hit Automation, Cloudflow, and then Instant. And so we need Instant because we want to be able to call this flow manually. And so once we select that, once it loads here, we're going to be prompted with some options for our trigger. So we're looking for Power Pages, but notice how Power Pages doesn't show up in the options here. So we're just going to hit skip for now. And once the editor actually loads, we'll be presented with much more options to choose from. So then so once the editor has loaded, we can then search for our trigger that we're interested in, which is Power Pages, which is right here. So if I click on it, we have our one trigger, which is when Power Pages calls a flow. And so once I press this, we're going to be presented with, we can add some inputs to what this flow needs. And so we can add some sort of text field. And so by default, when you add a parameter to your flow, it's going to be required. And you can change that just by clicking these 3 dots and then making the field optional if you so want to do so. And yeah, so for this demonstration, I already created a flow. And so we're going to be looking at this one for the demonstration here. And so we can see that in my demo flow, I have 3 parameters that I'll be passing in: the contact ID, last name, and email. And all this does is just create a new contact record with these parameters entered in. And then at the end of the flow, I do have a response step, which if this flow was successful, will return a response to the portal. So now that we have our flow created, we need to make sure that it can be called from our Power Pages site. And so the way that we do this is that we have to head over to the actual the app editor. And so here's my demo portal that I'll be using. So if I hit edit on this, it's important that we use Power Pages to edit or to add our Cloudflow because the older Power Apps interface doesn't allow us to do that. So once we get to the Power Pages editor, you can see if we go to the setup on the left-hand side here, we're going to see a section called integrations, which Nick was alleviating to earlier. And so if we click on this Cloudflow's preview section, we're going to be prompted with an interface where we can add flows to our Power Pages site. And so I've already done this. So if you click add Cloudflow, I'll remove this one and then I'll just re-add it. So I only have the one Cloudflow in my environment. And so if I hit add a Cloudflow, it's going to prompt me with, to select which Cloudflow I want. So if I just hit this one, this is the one that I created, it'll give me a URL which I can call. And so it's important that we copy this URL somewhere safe for now because we're going to be using this URL to call through JavaScript. And then another thing to note is that a fancy thing here is that we can add web roles to the flow. And so let's add administrators and authenticated users to the flow. And so this just means that only people who are signed in and people who are signed in but have elevated privileges can access this flow. So once we add these two flows, I'm just going to hit add. All right, so now we have our Power Pages add a new row flow, which can be now called in our Power Pages site. So in order to call this flow, now I'm going to show you the JavaScript code that actually does this. So if I head to the contact details page again, I just add a simple button to the top of the page where I simply have an on-click event where I call this function call synchronous Cloudflow. So I just scroll down a bit here, I can show the code. So inside the function, I define that URL for the Cloudflow, which was given to me from the configuration earlier. And I used Liquid to extract some common variables from the currently logged in contact. And all I do is set up my data object to match up with the input parameters that the Cloudflow requires. If I didn't have enough data that the flow required, this flow would fail to execute. And all I do after I set up my data object is I set up my post AJAX request to call that flow. So now if we head back to the portal webpage, I'll demonstrate now how this works. So we can see here we have our button call synchronous Cloudflow. And once I press this button, let's take a peek at the network tab and let's see what's happening. So we can see here I click the button and now we can see in the network tab, we have this GUID, which is the GUID of the flow that's getting called. And we can see here it was a 200. So it means it was okay, it was accepted, and it successfully passed. Now, if I go back to the console here, we can see our success message actually comes back as well. So once the flow's finished executing, it'll bring back our response. And it returns as a JSON object. Now, this flow only executes properly if I'm signed in or if I'm an administrator. So what happens if I'm not signed in or if I'm not an administrator? So let's see that right now. So if I go back to our Cloudflows here, let's edit this, or I'll remove it and then I'll re-add it back here. So if I select my flow and I add some roles, so let's only do administrators. So my currently logged in contact doesn't have administrator. So in theory, this should not work. So if I just hit administrators and hit add, so my currently logged in contact should not be able to call this flow. So let's clear the cache here. And I'm going to try to press that button again. And what I'm expecting to see is that I should see an error pop up in my console and in the network tab. So if I hit this button again, I'll open up the network tab here. So we can see, so if I click on this now, you can see here, we got a 403 error, which means it was forbidden. So this verifies that, web roles are, working properly as expected for this flow. And so this is how we can have the cloud flows locked down in the portal. And so that concludes topic number 3's demo. Let's go back to the PowerPoint here. So yeah, to conclude this topic, the pros of this are now that we have a secure way of calling our cloud flows. And this gives developers a bigger arsenal for coming up with unique solutions to problems that they're facing in Power Pages. And so yeah, this concludes my presentation, and I just wanted to thank you all for listening. And if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Yeah, so you do have a question here from Lucas. I have asked for a bit of clarification here. So Lucas says, as it is in preview, and he's a bit skeptical after the enhanced data model, how many bugs, issues have you encountered with this? He said, curious as he's seen some in the forums. So I'm assuming he's talking about the Power Automate integration. So I don't know, Jacob, when you were playing around with this for this demo, did you run into any issues?
When I was doing some playing around with this, I have not encountered any bugs. No, I haven't seen any issues with this so far.
Yeah, I mean, so from my perspective, I haven't seen any issues with it either. I could see potentially if you had a really complex flow that maybe took a long time to run, maybe there might be some issues. In terms of the preview label, I'm trying to think of when. I don't know if they've announced when it's supposed to come out of, or when it's supposed to be generally available. I would look at the enhanced data model and a feature like this to be very different when it comes to being labeled as preview. I mean, first, I wouldn't necessarily recommend using any of this thing in production, but I would expect like a feature like the Power Automate integration to become GA much quicker than something like the enhanced data model is. The enhanced data model is a pretty significant structural change to the product, and there's lots of implications to it. Whereas something like this, one of the reasons that they put things into or label things as being public preview is that they want the opportunity to say, hey, if we may never release this, we may decide that we're going to implement some breaking changes that might mean you have to redo some work. So in this particular case, maybe the format of the URL for calling this thing might change. Those types of things that once they become generally available, their hands are a bit tied on what they can do with this particular type of feature. So a few things. I would expect that something like this would come out into GA relatively quickly after being in public preview, because it's not a huge fundamental change to the product. I personally haven't seen any bugs with it. It's relatively straightforward. You make the call with the JavaScript, it executes your Power Automate Cloudflow, it returns an answer. So I'm not sure how many different things could go wrong there. And if they did make some quote unquote breaking changes, again, at worst I could think of it being like the URL that you call, whether it's the GUID or maybe some changes to the UI for setting it up. But I know that if I had a project here that was maybe a few months away from being launched, I would be pretty comfortable hoping that incorporating that into a design. Again, I'm not sure if they've announced a general availability for it, but I think it's something that's quite a bit riskier to use than something like the enhanced data model. Okay, so follow up here from Lucas. So for which use cases would you consider the synchronous flows except the security? For posting into Dataverse, I currently use the CRUD API for those cases, in some cases, then triggering a flow. So I think the big thing here would be with Power Automate, you've got all those extra connectors. You got the connectors to hundreds of these other data sources. So for the most part, I probably wouldn't be using this Power Automate integration for interacting with Dataverse data. However, even just the last couple days, someone had asked a question on one of our videos about the invitation code flow. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to have an invitation code. When someone went to redeem an invitation code, they knew that based on who was coming to redeem that invitation, which of the identity providers that person was going to use. So what they wanted to do was kind of hide the invitation, or either the local or whichever auth provider. They wanted to just highlight the one auth provider that they knew that person was going to use. Now, but unfortunately at that point, the user isn't authenticated yet. All we really know about them is that they provide us an invitation code. So there's really no secure way to say open up the web API and say, okay, well, if someone knows the invitation code, I can open it up and do a query to find out information about the related contact. However, that is not necessarily a problem if you're using something like Power Automate, because what you can do is set up a Power Automate Cloudflow that accepts a parameter of the invitation code and then returns a result back that is, say, tells you which of the invitation or which of the login providers that person wants. So that's a pretty simple, like it's almost like running a custom action within the API. It's like, here's some inputs, give me back an output. And in that case, you don't have to open up the web API. You don't have to enable any permissions on the invitation code table. All you're doing is saying, hey, this one specific Cloudflow can be used. And that's, again, it's only interacting with Dataverse data, but it's really limiting the scope of what the user can do. So at worst, if someone looks at the JavaScript codes and sees, hey, I can execute this Power Automate flow using this particular technique, all that's open is, yeah, if they have an invitation code, they can figure out what the authentication provider, which is not really a scary thing. Nearly as scary as, if someone looks at the code, they can basically query all the invitation codes and find out who's associated and all that sort of stuff. So that's kind of much scarier. So doing those kind of limited interactions like that, where you don't want to necessarily open up the table permissions, because of course your Power Automate flow isn't going to be limited by table permissions. So as a way of kind of building these actions that you can use, I can see a use case for that. But again, it's also going to be super powerful to start talking to external applications, external data sets using all of the connectors. Will has asked if you'll be able to access the recording. Absolutely, yeah. I know Jason and MS Dynamics Worlds, they post a recording. We post the recording on our YouTube channel as well. So there'll be lots of different places that you can get access to this recording. Jacob, anything you want to add there?
Nope, nothing to add.
All right, okay. All right, does anyone else have any other questions, whether they're about what Jacob has presented today, or any other questions about Power Pages, any of the recent news, anything like that? Otherwise, we might call it a day there. I do want to say thank you to Jacob for that wonderful presentation. We do get a lot of asks usually for these types of kind of advanced JavaScript type of kind of tutorials, walking you through some solutions, showing you kind of what's possible with this particular platform. So I don't think it'll be long before we might have Jacob back to present on a few more things. So if you do have any specific use cases that you want to see covered in terms of developing some JavaScript, please let us know. As I mentioned earlier in this call, there is the Copilot for VS Code that can help with some writing some JavaScript. So if you need help with the web API, I know help doing like validation, you can say, hey, I want to validate that this number is only going to be between this particular range. The Copilot can help you out with things like that as well. So hopefully not going to be putting Jacob out of a job too quickly here, but you can always ask Copilot as well. But yeah, if you do have any scenarios that you'd like to see covered, we can do that either as one of our community calls. We can do that in our blogs as well. So, all right, Jason, I'm not seeing any other questions here, so I think we can wrap this up.
Sounds good. Well, thanks again, Jacob and Nick. Yeah, we will be reaching out to everyone with information on next month and the recording. So we're going to stop the recording there. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.